You're listening to Stand Tall and Own It, the podcast for high-performing female leaders who are ready to make an impact by discovering the safety that comes from understanding their own value and exercising their own authority. I'm your host, Andrea Johnson, and I'm here to tell you it is time to just truly be you, my strong friend. It's time to stand tall and own it. Hey there, welcome back to another episode of Stand Tall and Own It. I am your host, Andrea Johnson, and the goal and premise behind this podcast is that you might understand who you are, how you communicate, and then be able to live it out with joy, grace, and authenticity. And today's guest is doing just that. John Brink is an entrepreneur, an author, a philanthropist, and an educator. I'm going to let him tell his full story, but here's a couple of teasers. First off, he was born in Nazi-occupied Holland during the Second World War. What does that tell you? He also understands firsthand the effects of PTSD, but he then went on to build North America's leading secondary manufacturer of value-added wood products. I'm going to also let him explain what that means. But at age 57, my age, he stumbled upon Ned Hallowell's book, Driven to Distraction, and he was stunned to discover ADHD. In his spare time, John enjoys riding dressage. That's not something most people just toss out there. Bodybuilding, philanthropy, writing, public speaking, and spending time with his family, wife, and animals. I am so excited to share this conversation with you. Trust me, you're going to walk away curious, motivated, and inspired by the energy and determination of this man. Let's meet John Brink. Hey there, John. Welcome to the show.
Well, thanks, Andrea. I'm glad to be here.
I have already told my audience a little bit about you, just some nuggets, because your bio could fill pages and pages and pages. But why don't you give us just a brief story of, just kind of bring us up to speed a little bit of like the main pieces of your story, because they are fascinating.
So I'm in my 84th year. So I was born in 1940 in northeastern Holland at the start of the Second World War. And, but I always say, if I do presentations, is that my parents were in love before they got married. And so in 1938, and they got married and had dreams of careers and family and all those things in northeastern Holland. So it was paradise for them then. Very quickly, they had a son, and the following year, a daughter. And then I was born in November the 1st, 1940. Then the whole world changed, and in particular, that part of Holland. Holland was invaded by the German Blitzkrieg in early May of 1940. My dad was drafted into the Dutch army, and the last they heard from him is just before the bombing of Rotterdam, which killed thousands of people. So for 5 years, my mom wouldn't know, and the family wouldn't know if he was dead or alive. So from there and then, the war started. And what I always say to people is that if, respectfully, anybody thinks that war is hard on everybody, everybody agrees it's very, very bad. And after the war is over, everything goes back to normal. It simply doesn't. Right. And it may take a generation more than that. So I went through that, saw far too much that I should not have seen, went through hunger and the coldest winter on record. And, we were liberated by the Canadian Army as part of the Allied forces, April the 12th, 1945. From that point forward, I always knew that I would go to the land of my heroes, Canada. And so I wanted to go when I was 17. My parents wouldn't let me. And, so then I was drafted into the Dutch Air Force. I was there for nearly 2 years. And then after that, worked in industry, forest industry in particular. That became part of my career. My dad had a career in that. My grandfather was a master carpenter. So I liked lumber in the forest industry. And so I emigrated to Canada when I was 23 in 1965. And I wanted to start with absolutely nothing, just a suitcase, three
Mm.
books, two sets of clothes, couldn't speak the language, didn't know a soul, didn't have a job. And I took with me $150 Canadian, and my dream was to build a lumber mill. And so then I landed in Montreal, took the train across Canada. Oh my God, that's a long way to go. 4 days, 5 nights. And so I came to Vancouver, and I went to the immigration office. Fortunately, there was a fellow that spoke German, and I couldn't speak English. And I explained to him what I wanted to do. I wanted to build a lumber mill. And he said, go to Prince George. That's where I am today.
Mm.
And, and our audience will say, where is Prince George? We know where Vancouver is in British Columbia. Well, Prince George, British Columbia is a big, big province, beautiful province.
Yeah.
Prince George is 500 miles north of Vancouver, or to our European friends, 800 kilometers. And that's the center of British Columbia. So I went in the bus 12, 14 hours, landed in Prince George, got off the bus with my suitcase, three books, two sets of clothes, and I counted my money at least three times. I had $25.47.
Look at you. That is something that you want to document, isn't it?
My employees gave this to me. But what I had lots of is attitude. No matter how tough things are, I know tomorrow is going to be better. I do not tolerate negative around me. And then
Mm.
passion, I work, whatever I do, I give it 150%.
Mm.
And work ethic, I work harder than anybody. Even today, still at nearly 84, I usually get up at 5:30 in the morning. I always think I'm late. I always make my bed, and then whatever happens that day is going to be busy because I have about 10 different companies, and it's not about me and how successful, but that's what I do. I'm an author, I'm a podcaster, I'm a speaker, and I do lots of things. And they say, how can you do all of those things, John? Well, because I'm ADHD.
Yeah.
And that's how come I do it. I call it a superpower. Now, the other part that I should share with you and your guest is that it took me academically, I was not a success story in Holland. I failed grade 3 and I failed grade 7 3 times. And they said, what are you going to do with this guy? Maybe
Oh.
some people said, send him to the mentally challenged school. My parents said, no, we're not going to do that. So let's see if he can build a career in probably the forest industry. So they got me a job at 13 as a furniture maker in the furnace industry. And at nights, I would go to the college to become a furniture maker. And so that's where I started my career. And, so then even when I left Holland, I always felt that kids can be hard on each other. When I kept failing school,
Mm-hmm.
then the friends that I had after I became a laborer, and everybody kind of looked down on a laborer. Not today. I'm proud of that actually.
Mm-hmm.
And but my friends went to college and university and all those kind of places, and I was a furniture maker.
Mm.
But I knew I was just as good as all the other friends that went to college and university, and so even when I started with nothing in Canada, it didn't take me long to get as ownership in a lumber mill. Already after 2 years, I was part owner of a little mill. And then from there, and that grew up. But everybody said to me, hey, John, you're so successful. I didn't feel that way.
Mm.
So it took me till 1997 until I went into a bookstore here in Prince George. I picked up a book, and the book's title was Driven to Distraction, written by Dr. Hallowell.
Mm-hmm.
And it was about ADHD. And I said, oh my God, that's me. And I wrote in the book, now I finally know who I am.
Mm.
And so that was to me a life changer.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more I found out about ADHD, going to Google and doing all the other things, I became more and more knowledgeable about it. Initially, it looked like 8% of the population are likely having or are benefiting from, my opinion,
Yeah.
ADHD, so, but then I found it was much higher than that. And then the other part that I did, and as you know, Andra, I'm on your podcast here, but I also podcast, and my podcast number 203 is Dr. Hallowell, who wrote the book Driven to Distraction in 1993. I bought it in 1997. And so we had a very interesting discussion on the Brink 203 on YouTube and all the other ones. So I mentioned to Dr. Hallowell that I read his book, obviously, several times, and then the frequency of occurrence, I believe, I suggested to Dr. Hallowell that it was more than 20% of the population likely have the benefit of ADHD. He said, no, John, more than 25%.
Mm.
Now, the other thing that I mentioned to him is that my experience was that successful, and the operative is successful, entrepreneurs and CEOs, probably up to 50% of them are ADHD. And he said, no, John, more than 75%. And I agree. And then I felt I had to write a book about it, which I did. ADHD Unlocked, and very successful book, actually. And then Dr. Hallowell, a very successful author, has written about 18 books, 5 on distraction. He is ADHD, and as well. So from that point forward, it took me. So the point that I'm making is this one: is that I read the book in 1997. It took me 5 years before I went to my own doc, who was a personal friend, delivered our 2 daughters, and walked into his office, and he said, "Hey, John, why are you here?" I said, "I think I've got ADHD." And so we checked it out. Yeah, I do. So I was 62 by the time I discovered and was diagnosed with ADHD. For 50 years, when I failed grade 7 for the 3rd time at about 13 years old, it took me 50 years of going through something is different about me. What is it? How come that I cannot do some of the things that others do? And at the same time, I'm a very good writer, which is obvious for and I'm a very good with numbers, but there are some things I just don't do well where other people do. And so obviously it was ADHD, and and the more I found out about it, the more I speak about the topic, that I call it a superpower.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
Yes. Let me jump in here because there's too many things. I'm never going to be able to remember all this. But I did want I'm like fascinated. I wanted to circle back around and just to give you a little bit of my own background. We adopted my son, who's now 15, when I was 42 because I was told I could not have children. And when he hit kindergarten, we always thought he was just a rambunctious boy's boy, right? It's like, wow, he's all boy, and these are some of the things that people say. And, being adoptive parents, we had no idea what was going on. And I don't know if ADHD is in my family or not. I think there are some clues along the way that it might be, but of course he's not genetically ours. But we finally discovered after a principal talked to us, said, you got to do something with this kid. There's something going on. And so we, of course, we're like talking to, and fortunately, I was working at a school of medicine at the time, which meant I had friends and colleagues that I could start, going to the right places, behavior analysis and cognitive behavioral therapy, and then a physical, like a physician who did children's developmental medicine. And within a year, we had a full diagnosis of combined type ADHD with, he also has anxiety, because that's another piece. But my husband used to be a reporter. So we dove in and started learning because we knew nothing. And we discovered Attitude Podcast. And that's where we started picking up on people like Ned Hallowell, who gave us such hope that this was not something, because, I was raised in this era of, yeah, you can grow out of ADHD, and yeah, and it just opened up our eyes to a whole different world to be able to look at our son and say, hey, kiddo, you have a Ferrari brain with bicycle brakes, right? It's like a Ferrari engine with bicycle brakes, which he's always been a car person. So that's worked really well for him. And to listen to Dr. Hallowell talk about how he has ADHD and how it really is a superpower. I think he's done some amazing work on changing the way we view it. But I love this story of you being willing to look at yourself and say, doggone, I had all these things that told me supposedly I was a failure. But the reality is my brain doesn't function the way they want to measure it, right? So what was that feeling like at 57 or 62 when you were told, yep, this really is you. It's official. You have an official diagnosis. Your brain functions differently. And look how successful you were doing things in a different way. What was that like for you?
When I picked up the book in that bookstore, I still have the book
Hmm.
from Dr.
Me
Hallowell.
too.
I still don't understand why I picked up Driven to Distraction. Why would I want to pick that up? And so I picked it up, I opened the book, and I looked at it, and I said, oh my God, that's me.
Mm.
And and so I couldn't let go of the book, and it got to the point that the owner of the store said, gonna buy it? No, I'm just joking. But that kind of a thing. It really had my attention. And then, it then started to become a major part of my life, understanding it. Now, the advantage that I had is that, Andrea, is that I've always been an optimist. I've always been a happy-go-lucky, but deep down, I know I was different. I didn't know how, but I was different.
Mm.
It was always a question on my mind. It caused me lack of confidence,
Mm.
and just due to circumstances that I had purely circumstantial, I got out of it in my latter years, after 60 and into my 70s, that it unlocked all the things that I was special in and that I had developed over time.
Mm.
And including there was a period of where I was not a good communicator. I have all these lumber mills and all the other businesses that I have, and I could interact with 3 or 4 people in a little circle, but not very good in a larger setting.
Mm.
Again, through pure circumstance, I was dragged to, I called it, by an ex-sister-in-law that I had to say, why don't you go with me to Toastmasters?
Mm.
And I said, why? Well, she said, this is good for communications. And I said, are you going to ask me any questions? No, 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 no. You just sit there and you just watch them. And then halfway through it, somebody said, hey, John, why don't you tell us who you are? I said, oh my God, I'll never go back here. I stayed there for 10 years and I became a distinguished Toastmaster, which is the highest level in Toastmasters. And
Mm.
since that, it gave me confidence now, and that was from 1990 to 2000,
Mm.
that I became a very active presenter and speaker, and I'm a very good speaker and presenter. Why? Because I have an amazing memory and always did.
Mm.
Then I'm a good presenter because it just gave me that other piece of confidence that I required to say, okay, now I understand, and to make it all work. Purely coincidental.
Mm. So let's go back to some of these percentages that you threw out there. I knew that I've heard Ned Hallowell's talking about it's, more than 25% of the population. But I love this idea that more than 75% of entrepreneurs and CEOs have ADHD. Tell me a little bit more about that. Is it because you need to have a brain that will function that high in order to get to those places? What is it that kind of gave you that idea?
I like it when you ask me that question, because the way I speak about it is my grade 7, 3 times, blah, blah, blah. So I started learning my way. So I would already listen to successful presenters all over Holland before I even came to Canada to
Mm.
understand what made them click. And then I was interested, if you ask me, I hope you will, but I'm going to mention it to you before that, is saying, what were the three books that you took with you from Holland? The one was Management by Drucker in Dutch. Drucker is one of the most progressive thinker in management, and the other one's Logical Thinking was important for me in Dutch, and the other one was about Canada. So I always had this interest, and I learned in my way, and I already was quite successful in Holland, although I didn't have the academics. So you know the you know so if I look at being involved in management and organizations, that people that have, and I say this respectfully, that a lot of times in the learning, we learn in a certain box about
Mhm.
how do you manage, how do you proceed from this to that, the other part. I don't do that. As
Right.
an ADHD person, I always ask the question, how does it look outside that box? And if we go this way or the other way, what will happen? It makes those other people that have been trained the other way very uncomfortable in a lot of
Mhm.
ways, because I go different directions, and it makes me more innovative. In fact, I needed a management individual in one of my companies, and I advertised it across Canada, looking for all the credentials of the management requirements that we had for that position. In addition, I added to it that ADHD considered to be an asset.
Oh, how many people applied?
I'm not even sure I didn't follow it directly myself. It was my HR department, but I had quite a few comments about it, and it got the attention. There's no question about it, Andrea, that that I believe, as Dr. Hallowell says, as I have from my own experience, successful is the operative. CEOs and entrepreneurs, ADHD.
Sure, because I think it could even be unsuccessful ones, except for well, because of the simple fact that we are conditioned to believe that there is one way to learn, there is one way to succeed, there is one way to walk through school. I remember my son's first grade teacher. We had a parent teacher conference, and she said, when he's working in teams, he always just kind of takes over. And by the time we had that, I was already a leadership coach, and I looked at her and I said, and the problem is. You know, it's like train them up to do what they can do, celebrate their strengths, You look like you wanted to jump in there.
The critical part is, with this book that I have, this ADHD Unlocked, I gave a
Mhm.
lot of them away. A lot of the cities that we have here, the Chamber of Commerce and all other places, I send them free my books. And so at one point I did a keynote presentation west of Prince George somewhere. And as I was sitting there the night before having dinner, somebody came up to me and said, a fellow that said, "Can I talk to you after your dinner?" And I said, "Sure." "Where are you sitting?" He said, "There." And so, and then afterwards, I went over to him, and then he said, uniquely here, is that I got your book, ADHD Unlocked, and I want to thank you for it, because I have a son, 15 years old, that
Mm.
has been struggling with who he is, and so we read your book together.
Mm.
And I said, that is the whole purpose, because I believe from my 50 years of not knowing, from the time I was 13, becoming a laborer, part of that today,
Mm.
and to the time that I was officially diagnosed, 50 years, I struggled with who am I, and why. And so the key step is to, the sooner we recognize it and make it what it is, somebody that is different. And
Mhm.
then the other part is that, and I'm sure you will talk about that, I believe the frequency between male and females are the same, not different, but
Mhm.
they are different and expose it in different ways. But the occurrence of ADHD, I believe, and I believe Dr. Hallowell does as well, are the same, but they
Yeah,
show it in a different way.
yeah, they just show up in a different way. And I shared with you before we started recording that one of the reasons that I really wanted to talk about this, not just because I think it's something we need to recognize, um, partially it's because I have clients who are now, as adults, through part of our coaching is recognizing in themselves, I think I might be ADHD. I'm like, well, let's just find out, right? I am not a clinician. I am not someone who can do that, but I am an advocate because there are times I wish my brain functioned like my son's. I wish I had the stamina and the energy and being able to walk these clients of mine through this, just the emotional idea of saying, is this me or is this not me? And helping them recognize it is not a failure and it is not a disease. It is a different way that your brain is wired, and it is an advantage that you have that the rest of us don't have.
It's not a disorder. It's
Correct.
necessary, but it's not correct. I usually, as I said, and I can blow my own horn somewhat, and you understand why. I'm a very good presenter. I have
Right.
an amazing memory. I'm very exciting speaker because I give it all that I got, and because who I am, I'm very good at it. And a lot of times when I make presentations, not all about ADHD, I make presentation about entrepreneurship, a number of other topics, but that if I do in terms of ADHD, by the time I'm done, a lot of people say, "Damn, I wish I had it too."
And that's not a I mean, we joke about it, but the reality is we just need to understand that not everyone is wired, and I think the thing that bothers me too is even this conversation around what's neurotypical and what's neuroatypical. If this many people are ADHD wired, then how is that neuroatypical? What is typical, right? I think we're still figuring out how to talk about it and how to make it something that we can actually work with and actually help people flourish and excel.
I agree with that, Andy. So what I say about not only my book, but many other books is that, when I wrote it, I say, and if I present about it, then I say it's not only about ADHD, it's also about people that are slow learners, maybe because of trauma or other reasons.
Mm,
And then the other part about it is that because the frequency of occurrence is so high, it may well be higher than even
mhm,
25%, maybe 30, 35% for that matter,
mhm,
is that I say the occurrence of it will be always close around you in your family, your
mhm.
friends, or in your workplace, that even those people that do not have ADHD, you should read about it because they are very interesting, and to understand and recognize it, they are unique in different ways. You should buy the book, a book, not only my book, but other books, to understand it. And you will find it very, very interesting in a general sense.
Sure. I mean, like I said, because I've studied so much about it because of my son and because of my clients, I tend to think, is that me or was that my mom? Or, because we never know. But I think that just understanding how other people think. Covey said, seek first to understand and then be understood, and being willing to take that extra step. But if you've got an adult listening to this, if you've got somebody who says, I'm a little different, I didn't always succeed in school, what would be your word of encouragement to them other than reading the book? What would you tell them to kind of give them a little courage to actually take that step to start looking at whether or not they are ADHD?
So, yeah, the so let me go a little bit further here. When I wrote the book, I felt so strongly about it that I have an obligation to talk about it.
Mm,
And in my case, in particular, because by the time I was 13 years old, just still a kid, I became a laborer, and I questioned myself. How come my friends are going to college and university? And although I loved what I was doing and all the things, but it took me 50 years because I really found out by coincidence that I was ADHD. So that then being said is that that when I wrote the book about it from an ADHD mind, that means you can pick it up, you can go one direction or the other. It's always interesting, no matter what page you're on. That's the one part. And the other part is that I felt by the time I had written it, uh, to tell you a little bit, is that at one point, I fly between Victoria and Vancouver. Vancouver is British Columbia, southern British Columbia. Victoria is on Vancouver Island. The flight between them is 12 minutes. I said the shortest overseas flight that I've been on, 12 minutes. Anyway, so one day I was sitting on the plane, and the fellow sat next to me and said, I don't know if you remember me. I'm Tom Romer. And I said, I don't really. He said, you were writing a book. And the book that I was writing is Against All Odds.
Mm,
It's a story about me up and down, not about how successful John is, but through all the ups and downs. I told him I am writing another book, and it's about ADHD Unlocked. And he said, that's interesting. Tom Roma was the vice president academics for the British Columbia Institute of Technology. And he
mm,
said, we are working on a concept of teaching, accommodating the slow learners or ADHD or trauma, whatever it may
mm,
be, and they call it micro certification.
hmm.
Micro certification is where I was not very good as many other people sitting in school for 3 years,
Oh, yeah.
talking a whole lot of stuff that don't interest me, where I'm trying to learn a skill set. And so what micro certification is being recognized now more and more is saying, let's first and foremost focus on that area and then add the other things later, or make the determining factor is learning that skill set first and foremost, and then be accommodating to those people that for whatever reason are slow learners.
Mm,
And so I think schooling is recognizing that more and more now in North America and in other places, I believe. So I asked, so then the following week, again, I was sitting, with Dr. Tom Romer, and then I saw him sitting in 1A and I was sitting in 5A, and I said, hey, Tom, wait by the gate because I have to talk to you. And so I told him, so he waited for me, and I asked him to write a little section about that in my book,
mm,
about micro certification and unlocking that part and saying, okay, I like that, because ADHD is something that blocks out things that are no interest and focusing on other things where they have an interest, like whatever that may be. And by recognizing that, you can accommodate the learning system and make it more effective. But the other part, even more importantly, is we have a desperate shortage of skill sets, not only here, but in North America.
oh, yeah.
Is and our learning system, the traditional learning system that we have now, where you put somebody in a classroom setting for 4 years and it only takes 6 months to learn the actual skill sets,
Hmm.
and the rest is all stuff that you may or may not use at some point, respectfully, is not helpful. And I believe that the time has come to recognize that.
Mm. Yeah, I think, gosh, when you talk about you could learn the skills in 6 months and then move on and do something else. My son would benefit from something like that. He's a ninth grader, so a freshman here in high school in the United States. And I will say that we have been very blessed in our school system to have administrators and counselors who are committed. And we have in the United States a 504 plan that helps us do accommodations. And we talk about that every year, or sometimes twice a year. But we always have a teacher or two that just isn't trained and just doesn't understand. And it doesn't matter how many resources I put on their plate. They are, buried under regulations and things that they have to do.
That's the point, Andrea, because they still have the grading system, the CPAs
Yes.
or whatever it is, said that you must be committed in all these other things. You must be at this and this level until and unless they change that system and allow it for the focus being on the skill sets, or saying that people that are slow learners, give them additional time to
Hmm.
catch up on some of the things that they have difficulty focusing on. And
Yeah.
especially with adult students that already are buried on. So the bureaucracy is still not caught up, although a lot of the teachers are knowledgeable about it, watching programs like us. But the bureaucracy has not adjusted to this reality, because once you have 30% of the population, I say, affected by this in some form or fashion, may it be through ADHD or and trauma or other issues that makes them slow learners, then we are not changing things quick enough in
Right.
that direction.
Yeah. I will say, we have standard of learning tests here. They have the unfortunate acronym of SOL, which growing up, that did not mean standard of learning in my world. But, and of course, us as parents kind of giggle about it. But one of the things that I'm learning that they're doing there is what they call pro- PBAs. So they're project based assessments, which allows them to do a project to demonstrate their knowledge. So it's not a pure test, but it's still the same grading system. But I do want to pop into this other, you've mentioned a couple of times trauma, because the other statistic that people don't always understand about ADHD is that 88, somebody diagnosed with ADHD is about 80% likelihood of being diagnosed with what they call a secondary morbidity, like my son is diagnosed with anxiety or uh, rejection sensitive dysphoria. And so you mentioned trauma. I know you've got in your bio that you suffer from PTSD. How do you work
And
those things together? I'm sorry?
a child as well from the
Yes.
war of
Right.
fearing. So that went all the way back to the time that I was 5 years, less than 5 years old, seeing far too much that we should not have seen. The
Mm,
fear of losing the one parent because the other one was
right.
no, but we didn't know if he was alive.
Hmm.
And so that feeling, that anxiety from the parent. And so I was well over 50 years old when I got counseling actually for the
Mm.
inner child. And,
Okay.
and so very emotional, really. So that and PTSD is still with me today. So
Mhm.
there's no question about that. So yeah,
Yeah, and I find it interesting when, like, both of the clients that I've worked with were diagnosed with one thing, and then it turned out to be ADHD was what looked like their secondary diagnosis, and I'm like, "It's probably your primary diagnosis, and nobody ever knew." But we also have people who suffer trauma because of the things they've been through because of their ADHD. So as adults, they have those things to work through. So it sounds like you would be an advocate for counseling and therapy and that kind of thing.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the sooner you understand that it is not a liability, it's an asset in a lot of cases, if you know how to unlock it, so that the younger the person is to understand it, that makes them unique in some ways. And once you understand it, then to have confidence as a young person is very, very important, especially today. And a lot
Mm.
of times when I give presentations to young people in particular in different settings and colleges, universities, or whatever, you know, I always, because we are collectively so in with all due respect, women in particular, about the way they look, the way they dress,
Mhm.
the way all the other things. Just saying that I believe the most important thing is to understand that we are all unique and special in our own ways. There is only one of us, and that makes you unique. And everything, virtually everything, is possible. So, but to have confidence that you are okay and you are special the way you are, is already a big step in the direction of creating that confidence. And then from there on in, then becoming aware of issues like relating to directly to trauma or ADHD that makes you a slow learner, or conventional learning, if you wish.
Mhm.
From there on in, it's better way to understand it, but does not limit an individual in terms of who they are or what career they want to pursue. Or they are different, but still very special.
Sure. And, as I'm a John Maxwell speaker, trainer, coach, and one of the things that I am certified in is DISC behavioral analysis. And the DISC gives us an understanding of how people communicate, and it's a unique wiring. But ADHD doesn't define you any more than any of these other things like a DISC assessment would define you. It is a piece of who you are that makes you unique, that is to be celebrated and to be used to your advantage, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And it can be, and and it comes back to what I said before. In order for me to put in perspective as to the uniqueness of an individual like me is that growing up during the war years, during trauma, difficult times, and all of those things, then going to not exactly a successful academic history, and then feeling that I had to start over new again, all of that. And then it took me 50 years to determine that the underlying critical point in my life was ADHD.
Yeah.
And the lack of understanding it and always wondering as to why am I different? But still already showing the benefits of the side effects of ADHD. I have an excellent memory, even at 84. I sometimes get, putting it bluntly, pissed off when I see CNN and some of the other radio stations and saying, well, when you're 80 or 81 years old, 2 years old, 79, you're done. So we get a nurse to hold your hand until you're ready for the graveyard.
No,
So
sir.
I run circles around any of them. I say, have me on your show. So maybe, and the other thing that I should show you at 84, that I'm writing another book.
Okay.
Quickly want to show you that. Is
Yes.
the one, Finding Your Passion, Living the Dream, very popular. And then the other one that I write is coming out in July, actually, is Living Young, Dying Old. And that's a picture of me, actually. I'm the oldest competitive bodybuilder in North America.
That is so
And
fascinating. That is so fascinating. I love that. Well, that's a really good segue, because what I was going to ask is that you would just go ahead and share with us where people can find you. You have a podcast, you have a website, you've just shared some of your books. We'll link to those in the show notes.
yeah, johnabrink.com.
And I've been there. Actually, I've got it open on another tab. Everything is in there, y'all. You can find it all.
Yeah.
You can
It's
find
all.
it all.
And so I say to those people that, even the people in general, get to know about ADHD, not only from my book, from other books, to at least understand those people that are that you care about, obviously, and first and foremost, but people around you. But it's such an important part of who we are in a general sense. And the better people understand it, the easier it is to recognize, but also see the qualities. They tend to be unique in a number of ways, and especially if they find things that are of interest to them. Again, I'm somewhat of the example. Grew up speaking dialect. Took me time to learn to speak High Dutch. By the time I could speak High Dutch, I had to learn to speak English, and then I had to become a keynote speaker, in demand one, and then I become writing a book. I've done 4. I'm looking at another 2 that I'm going to write, and saying, how do you do it all? It's ADHD.
That's right. You guys, you're going to keep going long after the rest of us are still like lying in our graves. It's like, y'all going to just keep going like the Energizer Bunny. That's what I keep telling my son. It's like, you just keep going. John, this has been delightful. Did you have one last piece of advice, maybe, other than just to remember that we're all unique?
I say be all unique, but the other part is give back to your community, become part of the community. And then the other part, I fly around a lot commercially, also private, but mainly commercial. And when I do in North America, I do a lot of business in the US. I always sit by the window and I look outside and say, it's paradise. It's paradise. And I'm not sure if we fully appreciate that collectively in Canada, the United States. That the democratic system tends to be messy at times, but it's much better than a dictatorship. And if you wonder about that, look at Russia, look at China, look at North Korea, look at Iran, look at Venezuela, Cuba. I say I love the democratic system, but how messy it may be, but the alternative is not what we want to go. That's not the direction we want to go.
Yeah, I love that whole idea of giving back to your community, because that's how you make a difference from the ground up, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you, John. This has been delightful. I knew it would be.
Andrea, a pleasure. Take care.